Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to this talk. I'm Nick Tippery at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and this is our project on the genus Bacopa in Plantaginaceae. Bacopa is a genus of herbaceous plants, often with axillary flowers or short inflorescences, opposite leaves, and there are some species that are fully aquatic in this group, which was why it became interesting to me. The genus is native to North and South America for the most part, and center of diversity is in South America. There are some other genera that have sometimes been intermingled with Bacopa, including this one, Mecardonia. Historically, it's had some species that were treated in Bacopa, but has been validated as its own genus. Another genus that I'll mention is this one, Conobea, which is also, maybe you can tell, a little similar to Bacopa, opposite leaves, axillary inflorescence. As far as the aquatic species, there are some that are fully aquatic, including this species, Bacopa reflexa, which previously has been treated in a separate genus, Benjaminia. We have the dissected leaves you can see underwater here, and the aerial flowers, of course. So as far as classifying the genus Bacopa, there has been some attempts, and the most comprehensive version of classification on the sectional level, this was done in 1946 by Pennell. And you can see here, I've highlighted the sections, and we'll talk about these as a going hypothesis for classifying. So these are the sections. I've got them alphabetized in the text there on the left. Section so-called Bacopa has become Bacopa following nomenclatural rules. And then also sections Brahmia, Chaetodiscus, Herpestis, Mela, and Sylvinula. This is a section that consists of one species that's native to Cuba, and as you can see here, has some interesting features that would tell it apart from the rest of the genus. We're going to leave that as an open hypothesis for a group that may or may not belong to Bacopa, and we'll have to evaluate that when we get the data. As far as the remainder of the sections, I've highlighted some of the characteristics that are more obviously useful for telling the sections apart. So leaf shape, the presence of veins that are more or less obvious, and flower aspect, actinomorphic, zygomorphic, and the presence of bracteoles. I'll just highlight those here. Got some arrows here showing you the bracteoles that are present on the pedicel leading to the flower, and that's a useful trait for telling a couple of these sections apart. So going in, this was sort of a hypothesis for molecular data. We would find species that belong to these sections. That was the hypothesis. Geographically, not a lot of clear signal there either. As I mentioned, you would find the most diversity in northern South America. So Brazil and neighboring countries are quite big in diversity of Bacopa species. And each of these sections, going initially from the initial historical classification of sections, each of these sections has a member outside of the North and South America, with the exception of section Bacopa, consisting only of the species Bacopa aquatica. But these other sections have members at least in Africa, sometimes a little farther distributed. So as far as getting started on our project, this was the data available up to the point when we took over our project, and shows that there are monophyletic Bacopa, with the exception of a sample of this genus Conobea. So sort of the moving hypothesis for molecular data was that this genus Conobea could potentially be nested within genus Bacopa. And there's a good initial sampling of species in Bacopa that we plan to improve on. And this is our data. Just jump right to the data here. We got data from the plastid NDHF region and also the nuclear ITS region. And I've highlighted the sectional memberships. And you can see that mostly these sections are holding up pretty well, with a couple noteworthy exceptions that I'll mention. But just moving forward, I want to combine the data into one phylogeny to make that easier. So 1, 2, 3, go. All right, so now we've got these data combined from the nuclear and plastid DNA for 27 species of Bacopa. And you can see, again, the sections are coming out pretty well. And some things are already jumping out to you, probably because I put arrows next to them. So we'll walk through some of these disparities one at a time. So first disparity is a number of species that have been assigned to section Mela are coming out in this clade of section Chaetodiscus that otherwise is monophyletic. And here are the members here. Bacopa arenaria, reptans, monoarioides are historically classified in section Mela. They do have somewhat elongate leaves, but otherwise they're coming in not too different from what we see in species of section Chaetodiscus. And I've highlighted one here, Bacopa caroliniana, which has at times a little more elongate leaves, if you wanted to use that as your characteristic to move forward with. So those species can be now considered within section Chaetodiscus. This other section here, Bacopa, as I mentioned before, is consisting only of this type species for the genus Bacopa aquatica. And the species Bacopa aquatica is nested within a much bigger group of species and no clear clade to separate it out from anything else in this larger section, section Mela. So section Bacopa, section Mela, a lot of overlap here. Here's an image of a Bacopa aquatica specimen. This is section Bacopa, and these other two are section Mela. Perhaps you can see not a whole lot of difference there. I think this might be an artifact of considering this aquatic habit that often characterizes Bacopa aquatica. So we'll expand section Bacopa to include section Mela. That still doesn't make it monophyletic relative to section Brahmia. Section Brahmia consists of this widespread species and commercially most familiar Bacopa monieri, that's shown here in a herbarium specimen. And we also found that this other species, Bacopa micromonieria, also belongs to section Brahmia. And unfortunately, we can't keep these sections as separate if we're treating these under a phylogenetic classification scheme. So everything gets lumped together. Again, just a little characteristic of the leaf shape that's keeping those apart. Maybe not enough to keep these as separate sections. So there we go, big section Bacopa now. Still largely in North and South America, and then I've highlighted the distributions of some of the more widespread species, Bacopa monieri. As I mentioned, commercially important. This is in the water garden trade and other trades. And then Bacopa floribunda, not found in North and South America, but instead found in Africa and pretty widespread in Australia. So those are a little bit farther, really this distribution of the section in Africa, Eurasia, Australia, that's due to just a couple of these species here. So section Bacopa, nice and big at this point. Sections Chaetodiscus and Herpestis, apart from those few species that I mentioned before, these are good reciprocally monophyletic sister lineages and some characteristics there to show you how to tell them apart. This is one where the presence of bracteoles has become pretty useful for telling them apart. Otherwise, some members of those two sections coming out as rather similar to each other. So similar that I forgot to give you a new image for that. Now let's treat this errant genus, Conobea. It's distinct morphologically. It's fairly distinct on a phylogenetic level, but it's not reciprocally monophyletic with the genus Bacopa. So this introduced an opportunity to either rename some of the Bacopa species or to group Conobea in with Bacopa. That will be forthcoming in a taxonomic publication. But it is pretty firmly and well supported, nested within this larger Bacopa clade, whatever you want to call it. This is an illustration of one of the features that's useful for identifying Bacopa relative to Conobea, this difference in sepal sizes. And it might turn out that that was not as useful or maybe as important for telling these apart as one might think. Maybe we have a secondary reversion to similar petal sepal sizes in Conobea. Time will tell. Biogeographically, again, lots of widespread species. So it's not that we have a geographic signature to any one of these clades. We still have this central sort of home-based distribution in South America, and individually members of these sections going out into lots of interesting independent dispersals into Africa. So here highlighting sectional memberships and the species that now can be found in Africa. So Bacopa monieri, again, that widespread species. Bacopa crenata decumbens, these are African-only species. Bacopa floribunda, found not in South America, but in Africa through Australia. Section herpestis, this was something we studied a little bit earlier, the species Bacopa agensis, which is found in South America, Central America up through Mexico, has been found in North America as an adventive species, and then also found in West Africa. And then this other species from section Chaetodiscus, an African-only species, Bacopa occultans. So highlighting the wider distributions of some of these species, Bacopa monnieri, not a lot of genetic diversity in a variety of places where this species has been sequenced from. So that's kind of interesting. These African species, Bacopa crenata and decumbens, only in Africa, and a little bit distinctive there. Bacopa floribunda, as we mentioned before, a good amount of genetic diversity, also fairly widespread. Looks to be the same species in Africa and Australia, at least for now. And Bacopa agensis, as I mentioned, this is one we studied previously as being new to Mexico. That was established last year in this publication. And no good evidence that the plants in Mexico are so different from plants in Africa, although I suppose you could choose to make that distinction a little bit here. And Bacopa occultans, not a widespread distribution, and that would be a unique dispersal into Africa from South America, from section Chaetodiscus. Another question moving forward is the origin of some aquatic species. So lots of these aquatic species, some very aquatic, some a little bit more mildly aquatic species, arising independently at different times and places in the genus Bacopa. So very grateful for the resources we've been able to take advantage of for this, especially the specimens that were loaned to us to use for DNA analysis. This was done without a whole lot of field work, which I think is a real testament to the availability of herbarium data and the willingness of herbarium staff to help out on something like this. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.